crisis of social relations. Not one word. A completely unscientific, un-Marxist, timeless analysis of strategies, as if the objective circumstances, the objective conditions, the economic, the social and the political crisis of the system were completely inexistent. Second point, what about the actuality of revolution? Is revolution just a daydream of the Trotskyists, or worse even of Comrade Mandel, something which some foolish people dream about? Comrade Monty Johnstone had an extraordinary formula. Only in those countries where there is no traditional representation of the working class inside parliaments and universal franchise do Soviets come up. Well, I ask you, the second Soviets which came up in Europe after the Russian ones, and on which very little is taught, came up in Germany. Wasn't that 50 years after universal franchise? 50 years after universal franchise. The third Soviets which came up on a rather broad scale were those of northern Italy, of our comrade Gramsci, whom you are betraying in all the positive sides of his conquest. That was after 30 years of parliamentary representation of the Italian working class. The fourth large-scale Soviet experience which we had in Western Europe was in Spain in 1936, with a working class which was not represented in parliament, which had no trade unions, no massive force of representation. This is a complete falsification of history. As a matter of fact, we have seen the basic historic trend of the European working class of setting up workers' councils, of setting up huge, massive, self-representative organs of the masses in every single massive, generalized struggle of that working class in a pre-revolutionary or revolutionary situation. And what has this to do with the existence or the absence of parliamentary democracy, with the existence of the absence of the representation of the working class in parliament? What has this to do with the absence of universal franchise? You cannot quote a single case outside the case of Russia where Soviets came up under conditions that there was no tradition of universal franchise. In every single other case where Soviets came up, there was a long, drawn-out tradition of universal franchise, and notwithstanding that, Soviets came up. So my prediction is, and history will see whether I am right or wrong, my prediction is that you will see Soviets again, dear friend, in many, many countries of long-term tradition of universal franchise. You'll see them in France, you'll see them in Italy, you'll see them in Spain, and God forbid, you'll see them in Britain too. Now, what is the real problem of strategy? It's not a question of insurrection. Insurrection is not a question of strategy. That's the final stage of the conquest of power. It's a question of technique and, to use a classical word, of art. That's not a problem of strategy at all. One key question of strategy is the question of class unity and independent action of the working class versus class collaboration. Now, I've heard here many apologies this evening about what the Italian Communist Party is doing. Please, Comrade Monty Johnstone, explain two things to me. All the nice words about transformation of the state apparatus, all very nice. Two concrete things. When the Communist Party of Italy is today signing an agreement with the Catholic Party and with the employers, applying an austerity policy, which is exactly the same thing which the right-wing Labour Party is applying in Britain, and exactly the same thing which the French conservatives are applying in France, what has that to do with a revolutionary strategy towards socialism? Perhaps I am an economist, perhaps I am economistic, but I think it has something to do with a thing which is much lower down to earth. It has something to do with the need to increase the rate of profit, and to increase the rate of profit at the expense of the workers by turning down the living standard of the workers. Please explain that to us. Please explain that to us. And explain to us the scandalous, because it cannot be called otherwise, hardly any right-wing social democrat dared write and do things like that, the scandalous statement today by Berlinger that austerity is the road towards socialism. And austerity is the road towards socialism because, listen, because it changes the pattern of consumption. What does that mean concretely? He says what it means concretely. He takes the beef steak away from the workers because, you know, the Italian workers are eating too much beef and meat has to be imported. And when meat is imported, you have a deficit in the balance of payment and you have to do away with the deficit in the balance of payment. So workers eat less meat. You can call that a revolutionary strategy towards socialism in Europe. I call that straightforward class collaboration in the service of the bosses. And try to explain that away. Try to explain that away to the Italian workers today. That it's not that when they get less meat and when they get less consumption and when they get a lowering of their standard of living, this has something to do with some far way strategy towards a democratic transformation of the bourgeois state into a worker state. Second instance, which is even worse, the Italian Communist Party today openly supports repression by the bourgeois state apparatus. Openly supports repression. It has been written in as many words in the Italian press. They say the same forces of repression, which were turned against the Italian workers in the 50s, today are defending what? They are defending the democratic constitution of the republic coming out of the resistance movement. Excuse me. Again, I am perhaps an absolutely unreconstructed economistic materialist, but I think the repressive forces are defending private property and are defending capitalist exploitation. And if you call, as a communist mayor, communist between inverted commas, if you call in the tanks against demonstrators in the town of Bologna, you are allying yourself with the bourgeois state apparatus, never mind against ultra-left students or whatever you call them, or radicalized, marginalized workers, but with whom are you allying? With whom? With the working class? Is the working class controlling the tanks today in Italy? Is the working class in power in the Ministry of the Interior or in the Ministry of the Army? With whom are you allying there? For whom are you fighting for this repression for? So we take the 2 points. We take the capitalist relations of production. We take the bourgeois state nature of the state and the repressive apparatus, and we say a party which stands for collaboration on the basis of these 2 main props of the bourgeois regime, with the main bourgeois party of the country, not with some so-called petty bourgeois party, with the Tory party of Italy, because the Christian Democrats are the Tory party of Italy. A party which stands for that is a party of class collaboration. How can you deny a thing like that? I mean, that's absolutely clear. Don't tell me that they have the support of the workers. The German Social Democrats got a much higher vote than the Italian Communist Party, notwithstanding their class collaborationist policy. That's no proof. That's no proof that there is no class collaboration, that they get big support of the workers. You have to analyze the contents of the policy. You have to see what social forces are allying with whom, against whom. And for me, the story is absolutely clear. No one can say this is tactical, conjunctural. This has nothing to do with strategy. Excuse me, it has something fundamental to do with strategy. Because the ABC, and on that is the big dividing line between revolutionists and reformists since over 60 years, the ABC of any revolutionary strategy is to hammer out, to get into motion, to get strengthened, and to get, if you want, prevalent, hegemonic in the long run, the unity of the working class as an independent political and social force in society against capitalism. I don't say that that is easy. I don't say that that promises quick successes. I don't say that the victory is around the corner, but I say one thing which seems rather obvious: that's the only way to overthrow capitalism. You will never, not in 1,000 years, overthrow capitalism in another way. Perhaps it's long, perhaps it's difficult, but it's the only way. The other strategy, the strategy of class collaboration, divides the working class deeply and establishes another type of alliance, an alliance of the apparatuses of the big bureaucratized working class organizations, supported by parts of the working class, I don't deny that at all, with the bourgeoisie against other parts of the working class. You will never get a situation in any advanced capitalist country where all the workers will say yes to that type of treacherous policy which is today put forward by the Italian Communist Party. Never. For that, happily enough, there is enough working class consciousness and there is enough awareness amongst the workers. And we have seen in Italy, we have seen the Teatro Lirico, we have seen the representatives in the final result of the shop stewards of 600 large Italian factories rejecting the policy of the austerity program which Berlinguer and Lama tried to push down their throats. So in the best of cases, what you are doing is the same thing which the Social Democrats did after the First World War. You are deeply dividing the working class between the more radical, more militant wing and, let us say, the less developed, less backward wing. Now, I entirely agree that a divided working class is bad for socialism. I entirely agree. I am entirely in favor for a policy of the United Front, for a policy of unity of action. I believe that without a great amount of unitary impetus inside the working class, you'll never get capitalism overthrown. But you'll never get that unity on the basis of a policy of class collaboration and capitulation before the interests of the class enemy. Never. For that, I repeat, there is too much awareness in the Western European working class. There is too much understanding and consciousness, and there is already too large a vanguard. On that, I will come back in a minute. When we say that there is a big structural crisis of capitalism, when we say that you have to put the problem of a revolutionary strategy in the framework of perspective, we say concretely one thing, that under certain circumstances, it is unavoidable that you have an increase, a stepped-up trend of elementary class struggle. That under these circumstances, it is unavoidable that periodically, not permanently, not every day and not in every country, but periodically, this crescendo of class struggle shatters the stability of the bourgeois relations of production, shatters the stability of social bourgeois relations, and shatters also the stability of the bourgeois state. We only have to look throughout the history of Europe since 1914 to see the regular recurrence of this type of pre-revolutionary and revolutionary crisis. Again, I say, what Monty Johnstone is defending here is a totally ahistoric view of history, of the development of the European labor movement. I mean, you cannot deny this recurrence. I didn't invent them, and certainly we didn't bring them about artificially, or no agitators or conspirators brought them about artificially. They occurred. And if you have the lack of taste, if I can use that word, to use the example of May 68, well, goodness, 10 million workers occupying factories, is that business as usual? Wouldn't you say that it is rather a little shaking, perhaps only a momentary, but a little shaking of the bourgeois order? What do you do in these circumstances? Again, we have two basic lines in the history of the labor movement. Some people, when that happens, get scared out of their wits. Generally, they are called opportunists, and some even call them traitors, but we don't use labels, and we just say certain people get scared out of their wits. We have received from Comrade Garoudi, who was at that time a member of the political bureau of the French Communist Party, a report on the daily meetings of the French Communist Party during the May 68 general strike. Every day, pour Segui, I will say in a minute why I say pour Segui, every day, poor Segui was attacked by these bastards who told him, stop that goddamn strike, it's leading us to a catastrophe, don't go on. I say poor Segui because poor Segui answered them, well, try, go to the factories and try. He did his best. In the end, he succeeded. But it was not easy, It was not easy. When you have 10 million workers occupying factories, it's not easy to bring them back to business as usual. Why are these comrades scared out of their wits? I think Comrade Monty Johnstone is very, very, very unjust to his great-great-great-great-parents who are called Bernstein and Kautsky, because they were much more articulate, much more consistent, and much more deliberate in their thinking than he is. They were scared out of their wits because they were convinced, first, that the working class is too weak to take power and it will be crushed in any confrontation with the bourgeoisie, unavoidable. And second, because they were afraid of what would emerge even from a victorious revolution. Okay, the Euro-communists today, and Comrade Monty Johnstone as their faithful echo, are in a little bit more complex situation because they try to defend the preposterous position that this same strategy of class collaboration and this same strategy of capitulation before the bourgeois order has to be explained by the strength of the working class, not by the weakness, but by the strength. Berlinguer has the real, I don't know, you get angry sometimes, and there is reason to be, and it's difficult to use the correct word. He has the audacity to say, even to write, that after all, the Italian working class is already the ruling force in Italy. So, of course, when you are already the ruling force, what's the need of making revolution? Well, you have it already, you have it got. Frankly speaking, amongst people who refer themselves to Marxism, not to speak about communism and Leninism, how can one accept such type of preposterous statements if really the working class is so strong? If really it is so hegemonic already, if really so what's the big cost of giving a little push and push the class enemy out of his position of power? What's the difficulty then? What's the difficulty of taking power in a situation like that of May 68? What's the difficulty of setting up Soviets? I have nothing against universal franchise. You can have universal franchise. You have a wrong idea about what the Russian Soviets were, my dear friend. If you read the first Russian constitution, you will see that the Soviets were elected on a territorial basis. They were not factory committees. Factory committees were something entirely different. That's not a difference between parliament and Soviets, that the one are factory committees and the other are territorial committees. The difference is very different. In another field, as you know very well, the difference is first that they have at the same time executive and legislative organs, functions. Second, that all the delegates are recallable on vote of the electors. Third, that they are a force in which, through the change of the relations of production, through the change in the social relations, the weight of capital, of wealth, of private property has been removed from the situation. Okay, that's not the point. The point is, when you have such a strength of the working class, why don't you use it to overthrow the class rule of the bourgeois? Why don't you use it to break the bourgeois state? Why do you use it only to compromise, vacillate, conciliate, and which has as the result, because that's the big accusation we have to address against you, which has as a result to divide, demoralize, make retreat the working class, and then prepare bloody defeats. Because you have the audacity here of saying to the Trotskyists, where have you taken power? Where is your big strength? I will come back to that in a minute. But I turn this accusation against you. You have these big strengths. Yes, you have it. You have these big mass parties. What have you done with these strengths? What has come out of the application of the Euro-communist strategy, which is nothing new. There's nothing new in this, basically. This strategy is 40 years old. What has come out of it? The bloody defeat of Spain, the bloody defeat of Indonesia, the bloody defeat of Brazil, the bloody defeat of Chile. All these defeats, hundreds of thousands of deaths, including the loss of your holy representative democracy, has been the result of the application of this strategy. And it's unavoidable, because you don't take into consideration the clash of social forces. When you have a big amount of working class militancy and enthusiasm, and you don't use it in its upside when it goes up, when you have a big unitary trend in the working class, and you break it deliberately in the service of a policy of class collaboration, then you prepare demoralization, fragmentation, and defeat. And then you have the responsibility for these millions of deaths. And that's a responsibility which I wouldn't like to take in your place, outside of all the other responsibilities of Stalinism. But let's say a word on why the Trotskyists have not yet won a revolution. I'm not an idealist. And as I said in the symposium of this afternoon, I base myself on historical materialism and not on the fourth gospel, on the Gospel of John. I don't believe in the absolute power of the word. And the program is not enough. Program is not enough. You need a program, you need cadres, you need organizational strength, you need relationship of forces. When you only have a correct program, well, you are a marginal force. When you have a correct program and a strong enough cadre implanted in the working class, you have got some chance. Only when you have a correct program, a cadre trained in that program and implanted in the working class, and a change in the relationship of forces inside the labor movement, only then can you have a real chance of winning the majority of the working class for your strategic project. And these circumstances have not yet occurred. In that sense, Trotsky was wrong in his predictions on what would happen after 45, because he underestimated the long-term results of your betrayals, because he underestimated the long-term effects inside the working class in a downturn of working class consciousness of 25 years of constant uninterrupted defeats caused by reformism and by Stalinism. Today, I don't say we are at the eve of a victory. Things are a little bit different. And your balance sheet is a bit childish, because you first know that it is not true. And second, you should be the last in Britain of all places to talk about figures. Let's talk about figures. Let's compare the organized strengths of British Communist Party and British Trotskyists in the middle of the 50s and today. The Communist Party has lost more than half of its members and probably 2/3, if not 4/5 of its activists. The Trotskyists have multiplied their forces by at least 10, if not 15 times. The general trend is exactly not the one which you indicate. Your reference to French elections were especially unfortunate, because first you left out the fact that in the second presidential elections there were true Trotskyist candidates and not one, and if you add the votes of the two Trotskyist candidates you come to nearly 1 million votes, which the British Communist Party never dreams of getting up in its history. And secondly, you forgot another small detail, is to say the municipal elections which took place in this year and where a slate of two Trotskyist and one semi-Trotskyist organization got between 3 and 8% of the popular vote. I repeat, between 3 and 8% of the popular vote, which is a thing we could not dream of 10 years ago, and you certainly cannot dream of even in 50 years in Britain if you continue with your present strategy. So it's rather unwise to quote figures, and it's rather unwise to base yourself on numerical projections in that field. But I want to end on what is the other striking, absolutely striking, flabbergasting gap in what Comrade Monty Johnstone told us here, and which again indicates how clearly today Leninism, as embodied by the Fourth International and by Trotskyism, and reformism of the British Communist Party and the European Communist Parties, the so-called Euro-Communist parties, are at two completely different roads of working class, let us say, strategy and projection. The very word internationalism was completely absent from Comrade Monty Johnstone's speech, completely absent. That there has been a communist international, that communist international came about as a result of a reaction against the big betrayal of the social patriots in 1914, which enabled a war to break out in which 20 million workers were killed for the sake of capital. 20 million workers were killed for the sake of capital. That this communist tradition was an internationalist tradition, a tradition of international solidarity, of workers of all countries in a common cause, and that they had to build a common organization in order to embody that common cause. This ABC, which no member of the Communist Party, from its inception till, let us say, recent past, would have dared at any time, to forget in a statement on strategy. This was totally absent from what Comrade Monty Johnstone told us here. And of course, in a certain sense, it's a tragedy what has happened, and a tragedy which was foreseen by Trotsky. When you had the nature of the Communist International transformed by the adoption of the theory of socialism in one country and the subordination of the communist parties to the specific and particular interests of the Soviet bureaucracy, you put a time bomb under proletarian democracy. That was under proletarian internationalism. That was absolutely unavoidable. And the time bomb has now exploded. And no, it's not anymore a question of building socialism or going towards socialism in the service of the Soviet bureaucracy. No, it has just become a question of each for his own, and God will then at some time in the future try to bring the brethren together. Can there be something more disastrous from a communist point of view than this total elimination of internationalism, internationalist strategy, internationalist perspective, internationalist sensitivity, and internationalist organization from a communist strategy? There is not even a Euro-communist strategy, it is true. I agree with Santiago Carrillo that, because each and single one of them have only their own national tactics and their own national interests, and they don't even want to collaborate with each other beyond just some consultations and agreeing to scratch each other's backs. They have no common project, not even for Western Europe. Abstraction made of the fact that it is a bit thick to have a common project for Western Europe, which takes out of the realm Eastern Europe, the countries of the colonial revolution, the American working class, the Japanese working class, and all the rest of the world. But even that is absent. Even on the point of view, there is not even a strategy towards socialist United States of Western Europe, which already would be a big step backward from the idea of socialist United States of Europe, full stop. But even that is absent. And we are living in what world? In what world? Aren't we living in the world of internationalization of capital, internationalization of the productive forces, internationalization of the class struggle, international wars? Has there been a single revolution since 1914 which has not been met by an international attempt at intervention of capital? Isn't that absolutely unavoidable under the present circumstances? And what do you oppose to that? Nil, void, nothing. Not one word. Internationalism has disappeared. It is a sad day that this end result of Stalinist degeneration has come to us in that most outspoken form of not national communism, but social patriotism with a communist, little pseudo-communist tinge as a representative of what still is a massive force in the Western European working class movement. We are absolutely convinced that the Euro-communist strategy as it is today is a strategy of defeat for the working class. But we are also convinced that it is a strategy of crisis of the communist parties, that these parties will go through one crisis after another, because they are trying to apply that strategy under circumstances of where, at least in many European countries, I don't say in all, there is a big upsurge of working class militancy, of working class awareness, of working class consciousness. The one positive thing about this whole right-wing term of Euro-communism is that for the reasons of their own, which we know very well, because otherwise they cannot get their democratic legitimacy in the eyes of the social democrats to which they direct themselves essentially, for reasons of their own, they have to take a more independent attitude towards the Soviet bureaucracy. That we say bravo for, of course. We are not going to align with the Stalinists against the Euro-communists. It would be absolutely crazy. And that as a result of that, there will be a growing climate of democratic debate inside the communist parties and inside the trade unions controlled by the communist parties, which is an unavoidable byproduct of the combination of Euro-communism and the upsurge of the working class movement in Western Europe. And we will try to have debates like this one, not only in Britain, but in many other countries. We have challenged Santiago Carrillo for a similar debate in Spain. We will challenge the Italian Communist Party, and we will challenge the Belgian Communist Party, and we will challenge the French Communist Party for similar debates. And we will challenge them again and again to apply their big credo of pluralism inside their own parties, to readmit the right of tendency, to readmit the right of tendencies inside the trade unions, to readmit the right of tendencies inside the communist parties, to readmit real democratic debates throughout the world communist movement to publish documents, to publish the book of Comrade Barrow, to publish the books of all the communists murdered by Stalin, again, sell them again in the communist bookshops everywhere, export them to the Soviet Union, export them to Czechoslovakia, export them to Poland, export them to Eastern Germany. In that way, there will be something positive. In that way, there will be something positive for the rebuilding of a communist movement in the world, but it will be a rebuilding on the basis of the program of Leninism, on the basis of the program of the Fourth International, and with all those cadres which have been trained in that program, and to which, yes, Comrade Monty Johnstone, more than ever I am convinced of that, thousands and thousands of communist workers will flock tomorrow.